We'll make a little sidestep from Psalms to the book of Judges. And I think this message is very appropriate for our time. Because the Bible tells us that society in the last days, in our days, is one where iniquity abounds. And Paul gives us a profile sketch of what man will be like when he writes to Timothy in 2 Timothy 3. And that's a very sobering sketch, but it's also recognizable. We live in those days, perilous times. It is a time that is bent towards idolatry, religion that is man-made, man-centered and man-pleasing, a form of godliness, Paul calls it. It is a time where there is great connectivity, globalism, social media, and at the same time, radical individualism. It is a time where we cannot afford to have as much as a toe in the world. Paul instructs us to continue in what we have learned, and Jesus tells us to endure until the end. Well, Solomon tells us that there is nothing new under the sun. There are lessons to be learned from the past. So let us look at one of those stories from the past. And for that reason I want to go to Judges chapter 17. And let's read the opening verses 1 and 2. And there was a man of Mount Ephraim, whose name was Micah. And he said unto his mother, the 1100 shekels of silver that were taken from thee, about which thou cursedst, and spakest of as also in mine ears, behold, the silver is with me. I took it. And the mother said, blessed be thou of the Lord, my son. Now, it's a strange beginning of a strange story. The man was from Ephraim, and his name is Micah. Now Micah, to begin by looking at the name, because there is already some irony in there, Micah is derived from Micaiah, which means who is like Yahweh. It's comparable to Michael, who is like El, and Micaiah, who is like Yahweh. Another form of this name is Micaiahu. And he had stolen no less than 1100 shekels from his own mother. And just to give you an idea, 10 shekels would be a good wage for an entire year. We can find it, by the way, later on in this chapter. But so this was about 110 years of wage. It was really a fortune. Today it would be in the millions. And his mother had cursed whomever had taken the money, not knowing that it was her own son. And that was a bit too much for Micah, and he confessed and returned the money. And instead of being angry, his mother blesses him. And mind you, she blesses him in the name of the Lord God, Yahweh. Well, you might think, okay, at least it ends well, but it doesn't end here. This is just the beginning. We continue in verses 3 and 4. And when he had restored the 1100 shekels of silver to his mother said, I had wholly dedicated the silver unto the Lord from my hand for my son, to make a graven image and a molten image. Now therefore I will restore it unto thee. Yet he restored the money unto his mother. And his mother took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to the founder, who made thereof a graven image and a molten image, and they were in the house of Micah. The mother stated that she had dedicated the money to the Lord, Yahweh, in order to create idol images. And since it was dedicated to the Lord, this idol most likely was an image representing Yahweh. But of course that did not make it good. God had explicitly forbidden to make graven images. The whole episode reveals a lot about the character of Micah and of that of his mother, and also of the spiritual state of Israel. We should note also that it was very easy apparently to have an idol made in Israel at that time. Clearly Israel's society was bent towards idolatry. And using the excuse that the idol represented Yahweh only made things worse. Actually, the same excuse was used by Aaron in making the golden calf. Let's remind ourselves of that from Exodus 32, verse 4 and 5. And he received them at their hand, that's all the gold, and fashioned it with a graving tool after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, "These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord Yahweh." So the calf was now had become a representation of God, the one who led them out of the land of Egypt. And a feast was dedicated to the Lord. But again, that of course did by no means make it acceptable. It was a violation of God's commandments and it had dire consequences. Back to Micah, we read that the idol was a molten image that was fashioned, graven into a more detailed image. And this is typically what man does. He wants to make God into his image. Many religious people do just that. In their minds they carve their own idea of God, and they assume that this is the God of the Bible. In reality, it takes effort to understand and to get to know the God of the Bible. It takes a relationship. It takes Jesus, his Son. The story continues, verse 5. And the man Micah had a house of gods, and made an ephod and teraphim, and consecrated one of his sons, who became his priest. Having the idol was not enough. He set up a shrine, a house of gods, a small temple of sorts. And others would come to worship the idols. And he made an ephod. It's a specific garment worn by the priests of Israel. We can read it, of course, in Exodus and Leviticus. And with all this, he was trying to imitate the true worship at the tabernacle of God. He also made teraphim. These were other idols, usually small statues, that were worshipped in the hope of gaining prosperity and guidance. Many houses had these small house idols called teraphim. Teraphim is plural. And there were different gods, different idols for different purposes. And finally, he established an order of priesthood among his sons. In other words, he did everything to set up a rival religion in Israel. And obviously, all of this came from Micah, not from God. This was a man-made and man-centered religion. And the purpose of this whole theater was to please man, not God. Do we not see the same pattern of man-made, man-pleasing religions all around us? Oftentimes including graven images, shrines, priests, etc. Let's remember that this is not from God. Then we read verse 6, which is interjected there and can be read several times throughout the book of Judges. It's sort of a reminder. It says, "In those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes." We see here the result of a nation without leadership, without strong leadership. However, we should not get this wrong. Israel had never had a king up to that point. And later history shows that a king did at certain times improve things, but at other times they were equally bad. The real problem was that they had rejected God as king. There was no moral anchor. And thus everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This is radical individualism. People looked at self for their guide to morals, to morality and ethics. It doesn't say here that the people did wrong. They did right, but they did right according to the measurement of themselves, in their own eyes. And that's what we hear so often nowadays. Follow your heart, as long as you're happy. If it feels good, it is good. All these kind of things. And the whole woke agenda is based on these principles. And so it seems right. It seems right. And it certainly seems right in the eyes of the people going along. But the Bible tells us that it doesn't work out well to do what seems right in one's own eyes. It seemed right in the eyes of Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, but God had said it was wrong. It seemed right in the eyes of the sons of Jacob to sell their brother Joseph into slavery, but it was wrong before God. It seemed right in the eyes of Sarah for Abraham to have a child with Hagar, but it was not right with God. It seemed right in the eyes of Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons, to offer strange fire unto the Lord, but God had said that it was wrong. It seemed right to King David to commit adultery with Bathsheba and to cover it with murder, but it was very wrong before God. It seemed right in the eyes of Judas to betray Jesus for money, but it was not right before God. And the list goes on. It is just not smart to follow our own instincts. We need to follow God's way and not our own. Solomon writes to this in Proverbs 14 verse 12, "There is a way which seemeth right unto man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." And so one leads to the other. The story gets worse even. Verse 7 and 8. "And there was a young man out of Bethlehem, Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. And the man departed out of the city from Bethlehem, Judah, to sojourn where he could find a place. And he came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, as he journeyed." Here comes this young Levite to the scene. Contrary to the other tribes, Levites had no specific region assigned to them, but there were certain cities established by God where they could live. And apparently the place for this Levite was in Bethlehem, belonging to the tribe of Judah. However, this young man did not want to stay within those constraints and was looking for a place, it says, wherever he could stay. He too was doing what was good in his own eyes, and he was not adhering to his calling. He was going about, he was offering himself as a priest for hire, wherever he could find a place, and not in the place that God had for him. It should make us stop and think how many Christians are going wherever they like and doing what seems right to them, instead of being where God has placed them and doing what God has called them to do. All the while they believe that what they are doing is right. Actually, it is right in their own eyes. And so the Levite ends up at Micah's house. We continue in verse 9 through 11. "And Micah said unto him, Whence comest thou? And he said unto him, I am a Levite of Bethlehem, Judah, and I go to sojourn where I may find a place. And Micah said unto him, Dwell with me, and be unto me a father and a priest, and I will give thee 10 shekels of silver by the year, and a suit of apparel, and thy victuals. And so the Levite went in, and the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man was unto him as one of his sons." This job-seeking Levite was a golden opportunity for Micah. Having a Levite priest would legitimize his shrine and his false religion. And so he offers him a good salary. We see here also how much that is for a whole year compared to the money that Micah stole from his mother. And so he gives him a good salary, he gives him clothing, food, and they agree on all this. The Levite is a perfect example of a hireling. He served God or any idol for whatever it could give him. Note that people can be hirelings in different ways. We see, of course, hirelings like this, who do it for money. This is the most obvious. But actually there are also many emotional hirelings that we can find in churches, in Christianity. They will get into the ministry because of insecurity, because they need approval, and they find it there. And this actually means that they are not really serving God, but they are actually serving self. And if you think about this a bit, you will probably find many of those around you. Micah tried to uphold a form of godliness, and the Levite made it look more real. But the reality was that by all this he was only violating God's commands more and more. And it doesn't even end here, he goes a step further. And Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and was in the house of Micah. Then said Micah, "Now know I that the Lord will do me good, seeing I have a Levite to my priest." Knowing that the Levites are called by God to serve as priests, Micah thinks that he has the authority to consecrate this runaway Levite into his idolatrous religion. And of course we know from Scripture that Christ is the one who appoints the ministers in his church. But this, what's happening here in the story of Micah, is what we see in established religions all around us. Symbols, pictures, statues, priests, ordained clergy, robes, cathedrals, temples, synagogues, etc., etc. Is this really what God asked from us? Like the renegade Levite, there is also another priest of sorts in the near future that will make the false global religion that is coming upon this world seem right. And we see sort of a parallel here with the false Christ, because this Levite, meaning a man of God, was from Judah, Bethlehem. So there's a connection here, Judah, Levi, and Bethlehem. And we know, of course, that Jesus was from the tribe of Judah, born in Bethlehem, and that he was related to Levi. He was also a priest, and he's now our eternal high priest. But we know, of course, from the Gospel of Luke that Mary was from the tribe of Judah, and her cousin Elizabeth was from the tribe of Levi, and they were related. We find there talking about Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist. So there is this connection, and we see that this false prophet has the same, seems to have the same connection. So, posing as a false Messiah. That is what we will see in the near future. That is what is also being foreshadowed here, and you see how it's building up, how one goes. How it goes from one to the other. And when the false prophet turns on the scene, we can read in the book of Revelation, many will fall for it. Now the whole story here in the book of Micah would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. Micah literally violated the whole first half of the Ten Commandments. But apparently he did not do it for the money. He was rich already, wealthy. Apparently also not for the fame. There could be maybe some of that factoring in, but that would be conjecture. Actually, from what we read, it can be argued that he was utterly sincere. He was really serious and sincere about this religion and about his gods. But still he was also totally wrong. Sincerity brings nothing if it is not based on truth and reality. And I had to think of a story, I had to look up the name, but I found it. I had to think of this story that happened in 1912 of a man called Franz Reichelt. He jumped off the Eiffel Tower wearing a self-made parachute suit, sort of wingsuit. He sincerely believed that he would land safely. He sincerely believed it. Yet, that didn't help. He plunged to his death just the same. Sincerity, doing what is right in your own eyes, is a bad or even a destructive philosophy. Unfortunately, it is prevalent today. I mentioned it already, as long as it feels good, as long as you're happy, be who you feel that you are, and all these kind of things. And people, in all sincerity, follow these feelings. Like Micah, many church people, believers, pastors, bishops, priests, they are equally sincere, but they are also equally wrong. They set up their own religion. They create their own God, and they genuinely believe that the Lord will do them good. And there are always hirelings around, officials, ordained people wearing the right attire, having all the titles, using the right language, and they will make it seem legitimate. It testifies of a society in decline. And right now the perfect storm is brewing for the ultimate false religion. Let's remember that Jesus never asked for religion. He made it simple, very simple. All he said is, follow me. Amen.